All right. So last week we talked a little bit about how to build muscle. We talked a little bit about the nuts and bolts and some of the things that need to be in place in order to make building muscle, or losing fat for that matter, more effective. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how the exercises you select have a big impact on the hormonal reaction you have to exercise and what role hormones play in your progress. And then after that, we're going to talk about the key exercises you need to do to make sure that you get the maximum benefit from your workout. And then to wrap it up, we're going to talk about the ideal splits you can use so that you get the most of your time out of the gym. So my intention for this video is, if you're a novice, this is a good video for you to watch. If you're someone who's been working out for a while and you're not quite seeing the results you want, this video is a good video for you to watch. And if you're any kind of a personal trainer or a coach and you understand what you're doing, but you're maybe having some trouble kind of figuring out talking points to educate your clients, this is a good video for you to watch. So with that in mind, what we're going to start with is the hormonal response to exercise. This is something that I think some people understand, some people don't, and sometimes people get a little confused. So when we exercise, we're giving our body a signal, okay? You give the body a signal, the body adapts to that. I've talked before about specific adaptation to impose demand. So we tell the body we want it to adapt to something, and then it adapts. And one of the ways it does that is through hormonal responses. So an obvious one is testosterone. And a lot of people are aware of testosterone, but I think there's a lot of confusion about that. So part of what you have to understand is the higher your testosterone levels are, the easier it is to build muscle. This is one reason why it's easier for men to build muscle than women. Men produce way more testosterone than women do, about 10, on average, like 10 times more per age group. So it's just much easier for men to build muscle. However, when a man has lower testosterone levels, and there's a lot of things that can affect that, building muscle can be difficult. I'll probably make some videos about that at some point. What I'm going to say right now is, if you think your testosterone levels are low and you want to get them tested, just do your research. That is something that's very trendy right now, and some medical professionals are handling it really well, and some are not. So you can cause more problems than you solve if you don't know what you're doing. So don't just go to the nearest clinic and assume they know what they're doing. Don't go that route. But for today's purpose, what I want you to understand is you want to do as much as you can to encourage your body to have high testosterone levels. So part of that is exercise, part of that is rest and recovery. So if you work out 6 days a week and you sleep 2 hours a night, you're going to have low testosterone levels, okay? You have to give your body time to recover. A lot of people who hit the gym under recover, especially if they train with like a high training frequency like we talked about last week. So testosterone levels, we want them to be on the high end, and then sometime we'll go into more detail about free testosterone versus total testosterone and how that relates to estrogen and whatnot. But for now, I just want you to understand that your testosterone levels are important. As far as not suppressing testosterone, so first, understand part of that is on the rest side. So you need to get proper sleep. You need to get in plenty of fuel. And then you also need to not work yourself into the ground. So most people don't recover very well, to be frank. And you have to be very cautious, because you might see someone at the gym or read about somebody online or something like that, and they might talk about how much they exercise. You have to compare apples to apples. So if you're looking at someone whose job is to be in shape, and your job is sitting at a desk 40 hours a week, 40 to 60 hours a week, and then you go to the gym 3 times a week, you can still learn from that person, but don't try to duplicate them. You will die. You probably won't die, but you're not going to see the same results they get. So if you have a lot of leisure time, then you can maybe imitate that type of person, but most people need to look at things from a more realistic perspective. And the point of that is basically, like, if you're trying to work out 2 hours a day for an extended period, you're going to drive your testosterone levels down to the point to where you're not going to see any progress. You're going to regress, and it's not going to make sense to you because you're thinking you're working out all the time. So nailing that down, I'm kind of looking at 2 different things. One is, some people who talk about how much they exercise are lying. You have to understand that. Even like a lot of competitive athletes, they will lie about what they do to mess with the heads of their competition. Okay, so there are some things out there that are done. You might even see something on like a cable network station or something where like a coach is talking about what they're doing with their athlete to prep them for. It might be a cage fight, it might be golf, just whatever. They're not always telling the truth. There's a psychological component to that. So be cautious about like adopting things that you see on documentaries or whatever, or online, Instagram, whatever. So the other thing you have to understand is a lot of physique athletes who do work out with a very high training frequency, that also do a lot of volume, a lot of them are on anabolics, which anabolics are not a small difference, they're a huge difference. If you want to use anabolics, you'll have to get that information somewhere else, because I don't really advocate that for the most part. Especially if you're very young. So like if you're in your especially if you're in your teens or if you're in your 20s, I would tell you to develop your body to the most you can before you explore anabolics, because they're just gonna ultimately that'll just kind of shorten your potential. So okay, so understand basically that a lot of people who talk about working out a lot, they're on steroids, so that helps. That gives them an advantage you don't have if you're not taking steroids. And the other thing is some of those people aren't telling the truth. Okay, and that goes back to like the 80s and probably even the 70s with some of the well-known bodybuilders, when just kind of regular bodybuilding was really popular. So just keep that in mind. The other thing we have to understand is if we exercise too much or for too long, or at the wrong time, we're going to elevate our cortisol levels. Okay, so when we're looking at exercise, we have our testosterone, we have our cortisol. If your cortisol drives up too much, that will suppress your testosterone. So if you go to the gym and work out for an hour and a half every day, you're probably driving your cortisol levels really high. Now in the short term, you might see good results. So you see this a lot with people who do figure competitions. They'll do an hour or two of fasted cardio, plus they're working out, plus they're basically living on lemons because their coaches don't understand nutrition. They'll get in good shape for the show, but then they don't ramp things back up kind of gradually. And then if you see them a few months after the show, you'd never, ever, ever, ever guess that they competed in anything involving a bikini or a pair of shorts. So again, just be cautious about this. So when we exercise, we don't want to exercise to the point where our cortisol levels are getting out of check. Now, how do you manage that? You basically just keep your workouts on the shorter side. So for most people, after the warm-up, I like to keep the workout to about 45 minutes. Sometimes it's shorter than that. And my clients get very good results. So don't feel like you have to go to the gym for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. That's only going to be beneficial. I don't even like using the word beneficial. You're only going to see positive results from that if you're using anabolics, if you're talking about like long-term stuff. So you would be better off to work out twice a day, to go in for like 30 to 45 minutes in the morning and 30 to 45 minutes in the evening, than you would be to do like an hour and a half workout every day. You would get better results. So the other thing I want to talk about from a hormonal standpoint is growth hormone. So when growth hormone levels are high, it's basically just easier to build muscle, it's easier to burn fat. When growth hormone levels are low, both those things are harder. So if we do the right kinds of exercises, and we're kind of coming up to that, you're more likely to have elevated growth hormone levels. What you need to understand is that happens at night while you sleep. So if you're going to the gym and hitting it hard, but then you're only sleeping 4 hours a night or 6 hours a night, you're not going to get that growth hormone response, and you're not going to see the results that you could. So you have to be deliberate about your recovery. Don't take your recovery for granted. I have too many stories about athletes who took their recovery for granted and did not see progress. So don't do it. The last thing I'm going to say about that is you need to understand that we adapt to exercise when we rest. Okay, whether that means like burning fat or building muscle, to some extent even getting stronger. When we go to the gym and we exercise or exercise outside or whatever we're doing, that's the signal, but the adaptation happens after that, for the most part. I'm being really general here. But especially when we're talking about building muscle and burning fat, Most of those adaptations happen while you rest, so keep that in mind. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about exercises. So what exercises do we need to build muscle? Like, what's the most effective way? What this comes down to is big movements, compound joint movements provide much more of an anabolic effect than single joint movements do. So anabolic, when I say that, that means like a muscle building, fat burning effect, okay? So I can literally give you a forearm workout or a calf workout that will make you think you're going to die, but those are really small muscles. So even though that can be very uncomfortable, you're not going to see the hormonal response that you're going to get to doing things like squats and deadlifts because you're not using nearly as much muscle. I can give you a squat workout that is not that uncomfortable that you'll get better results on because you're using more muscle. So when we're looking at seeing the best progress, we want to use big lifts. And there's a lot I could say about that, but keeping things kind of general, squats and deadlifts are king. Okay, the reason they're king is if you do a squat properly, if you do a deadlift properly, you're using almost all the muscle in your body. There isn't really any muscle that's not doing something. Some muscles are stabilizing, some muscles are moving. I guess let me tie that in a little bit. So let's say we're looking at a deadlift. When you do a deadlift, you got muscles in your back, your erector spinae, the rhomboids, the traps. Those are all firing statically to keep your spine stable. Your lats fire really hard to keep your spine stable when you're doing deadlifts. And then your triceps also fire, which a lot of people don't realize. You get straight arm leverage with the deadlift. So, and then of course your abdominals fire to keep your spine stable. So all that is a static contraction, right? So we have a static contraction that's taking place to keep things stable, but then we have the glutes and the hamstrings that are firing to cause the movement. So we have a static contraction and a dynamic contraction. So a lot of stuff is firing. The muscles in your neck fire to support your head. There's an awful lot going on. Even your calves are working because they're stabilizing your ankles as you go through the pull. So when we do a deadlift, and it's very similar with the squat, just the mechanics are obviously a little bit different, but when we do those type of movements, we're using so much muscle that we get a much stronger hormonal response than if I go get on a leg press. Now again, I can get on a leg press and absolutely do a soul-crushing workout, but I'm really just using my quads. No matter how hard you do the leg press, you're not really going to engage the abdominals and the back muscles and everything else. You just don't have to, or your stabilizer muscles, your adductors and your abductors. So there's a lot that's getting left out when we use machines over free weights. And most people understand that these days. But so for the lower body, squats and deadlifts are king. Now, well, I'll talk about splits in a minute, but for the upper body, I think two of the best exercises are dips and pull-ups. Okay, a lot of people consider both those to be basically like squats for the upper body. So dips are fantastic. They're one of my all-time favorite exercises. Some people don't have the range of motion or to do them, and if you can't do them, then don't. You can still do overhead presses and bench press. That's fine, but if you can do dips are an awesome choice. And then pull-ups, of course, are great too because they involve a lot of muscle. So now, that doesn't mean you can't do single joint work. You just don't want to prioritize it. You should do single joint work because it can help the muscles grow and it can also prevent injury. A lot of what I do with athletes to help them to avoid injury, basically, is we do single joint work to focus on stabilizer muscles that tend to get weak. That can include the biceps. And I know some coaches find that soul crushing, but if you strain a bicep, it's not doing you any favors. So, and I know some coaches will argue that just doing pull-ups and chin-ups are enough to recruit the biceps, but that really depends on how someone is structured. Some people will recruit the biceps on chin-ups and maybe barbell rows. Some people won't recruit them as much. It just depends on how they're built. So don't necessarily count on that. So from a hormonal standpoint, we're going to get a better response from squats, deadlifts, things like dips, pull-ups, and then we could say like bench press and overhead press. Barbell rows are also a good option. Seated rows are probably less because it's a little bit simpler because you're seating. So when you're seated, you're not going to get the same recruitment that you're going to get if you stand up and pick up a barbell or a kettlebell or a dumbbell or whatever else it is. Okay, so big lifts are better than small lifts. For this subject, in real general terms, what I would probably suggest, let's say somebody wants to put on 15 or 20 pounds of muscle. I'm probably going to put them on a program where they're doing a lot of compound joint stuff and not worry too much about single joint stuff. I'll probably throw in some accessory work, but the focus is probably going to be on compound joint stuff until we get closer to where they want to be. And then once they get closer to where they want to be, we'll start looking at things and say, okay, we need to bring up the biceps or bring up the calves or bring up the VMO or whatever it is. So there's a lot that can go into that. Now, let's talk about splits. So what kind of splits are the most effective for building muscle? This is something that people probably disagree about quite a bit. I know a lot of people like to work out 6 days a week. Again, I think that's pretty much for if you're on anabolics, unless you have a very high work capacity or unless you're structuring things in a real particular way. So I often work out 6 days a week, to be transparent about it, but I do very simple workouts, and I've done this for a long time, and I'm also not preparing for like a show or anything. I basically alternate lifting days and conditioning days. So, but that's I've adapted to that over the years. I didn't start out doing that. So there's a lot of ways you can do splits. What some people actually need to do is plan rest days. Okay, so I think for most people, 4 days a week is a sweet spot. So if you're lifting 4 days a week, and then maybe on the other days you could do something active like play some recreational basketball or go for a walk. I'm a big fan of walking. I also like what's known as wrecking, which is a strange word if you don't have a military background, but I have a weighted pack that I like to wear when I walk my dog. So that kind of fills some of my very specific conditioning needs. Not all of them, but it does fill one of the niches. But a real effective split. This is an old Ian King split. Now, if you're a personal trainer or a coach and you hear me say Ian King and you have no idea who that is, write that down and go look him up later. Ian King is a very knowledgeable strength coach, and he's offered a lot to the strength and conditioning community. You could learn a lot from him. But a split that he promoted years ago was basically doing legs on Monday, upper body on Tuesday, off on Wednesday, upper body on Thursday, and then legs again on Friday. So the way we do that is one day we do quads and one day we do posterior chain. And that is a split that I use a lot for a lot of different goals, but it's very effective. For most people, I think it's much more effective than either doing like trying to do squats and deadlifts in the same day. It's a good combination of stimulus and rest because you get the weekends off. So it works best if you take 2 days off between Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Or however you structure the week. Obviously you could pick different days, but it's basically like 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 2 days off, and repeat. So that's a really good split that's easy for most people to apply. If you're trying to build muscle, I think you'll get better results if you approach that. And again, the reason is from what's going to happen hormonally. So if you're doing legs, because this is what a lot of people do, okay? They think they're going to do legs on Friday. So Monday is like International Bench Day. And so everyone hits the gym on Monday. And then Tuesday is like International Bicep Day because we did bench on Monday. And then Wednesday is probably abs and cardio, which might be okay, it might be not. And then Thursday you might decide that you have a back and you need to train it. And then Friday is probably leg press day, but it's also happy hour, so it happens about 50% of the time. So, I have an old joke that on Friday you have to earn your weekend, and on Monday you have to pay for it. So like don't miss those workouts. So I like to do legs twice a week, and I'll either do posterior chain on Monday and quads on Friday, or vice versa. Just depends on the client. Sometimes it'll depend on their gym and what they have going on. And then as far as like the other 2 days, I'll organize those in either like a horizontal or a vertical way. So if I'm doing like a bench press on Tuesday, whether it's dumbbells or barbells or whatever, or push-ups, I'll pair that with probably some kind of a row, like a horizontal row. And then on Thursday, if I'm doing either like dips or some kind of overhead press, I'll pair that with some kind of a pull-up or a lat pull-down, depending on the client. So there are other splits you can do. It's a big subject. Feel free to explore the subject and learn, but you don't have to just kind of take what I say at face value. Okay, so I think that kind of wraps things up for today. So just understand that if you're trying to build muscle, your hormonal response to exercise is extremely important. There's a lot more I could say about that. I go into a lot more detail with that with my clients, but that's probably enough for today. So don't let your cortisol levels get too high. Part of that means don't work out too long. It also means don't skip a bunch of meals and then go to the gym, because you're just gonna, if you elevate cortisol too much, you're just gonna store body fat, and you will. Just like anabolism means you're building muscle and burning fat, catabolism means you're breaking down muscle to feel whatever you're doing, even if it's just sitting at a desk. So you want to keep cortisol levels down, except for first thing in the morning. And then if we do the right kind of exercises, if we do enough volume, remember we talked about volume, intensity, and training frequency. If those line up and we're doing the right kinds of lifts with our squats, our deadlifts, our compound joint movements for the upper body, in addition to some single joint work, we're more likely to get a good growth hormone response, which is going to make it easier to build muscle and easier to burn fat. And then the last thing is just your split needs to make sense. It shouldn't be ridiculous. Full body routines can be okay as well. That just depends on what you have going on and what you have access to. I use full body routines a lot. I think they're better for fat loss and building muscle, but again, it kind of depends on the client. And it can also depend on just what people enjoy and a lot of variables, but these aren't the only splits I use. I'm just kind of going over some general things for people that are trying to figure this out. So, okay, thanks for watching. That's all I got for today. Go train.